Welcome, everybody, to our webinar on how UNLV set the standard for lecture capture with Nexus. I'm Julian Fernandez with Epiphan Video. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Again, apologies for the little technical difficulties on Crowdcast. We're excited to see everybody here on YouTube, and we've got a really exciting day planned for everybody. We're going to talk through a few different things with Frank and Andy, but most importantly, I encourage everyone, put your questions in the chat. We want this to be interactive. I don't want it just to be the three of us sitting here talking about things that we all already know already, because we spend way too much time together over the past 2 years making this happen. So we really want to focus on three key areas. The first is really around that integration project and the vision and what that meant of how we brought Epiphan into the functional ecosystem that Frank and Andy had already put together at UNLV. We want to talk about standardization across campus and what that means, because I'm sure you just saw the video. We've got 200 plus spaces that all need to work the same way. And how do you make that happen? What does that mean? And the last thing is something that we got the idea. We'll give Doug and the crew at Oakland University a shout out. Something that came up in our session at ETC around how do we get buy-in to deploy different sorts of technology across campus, because we know we all work with a lot of different departments, a lot of different goals, and that's always a challenge. And I think Frank and Andy have done a fantastic job across the board with that. So we want to spend a little bit of time there too. So without much ado, I want to bring Frank Alaimo and Andy Borts onto the show. We're all here today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Great to see you.
Yeah, I think it was kind of fun in the warm up. We were all talking about, we're watching the video going, oh, I've seen this so many times on video. And, Frank, I think, said, hey, it'll be great, to interact with everybody, even if it is on video still. So it's great to have everyone here. I think I just want to kick this off. I think everybody just watched that wonderful piece on what you guys are doing in the classroom. And I think probably Frank is best equipped to talk through a little bit of some of those different spaces. I know some of the fun from our side, and those of us that have been on tours of the UNLV, you have a whole range of spaces. It's not just standard classrooms. There's Rebel Flex rooms, there's auditoriums, there's that Dolby theater, there's labs, there's kitchens. I mean, what does that bring into consideration when you're designing AV systems here?
Well, for us, it's kind of easy. I mean, we treat every space like it's the same. It doesn't really matter if it's a specialized space or if it's a classroom. We're a research university, so the vast majority of our spaces are research spaces. They're not just four brick walls and a lectern anymore for instruction. I mean, we still have, 220 plus general purpose classrooms. But we treat every classroom, whether it's a general purpose classroom, whether it's an auditorium, whether it's the theater you spoke of, or any of the new spaces that we just did in our engineering building, which you're seeing right now. We treat every space like it's the same. At any moment, there's going to be a need for something to be captured, and we want to be ready for it.
I like that being ready for capture, because I know that's a lot of what Andy does and where he comes in, and you guys already had a software platform for capture. So how does that work, integrating and managing all that from your side, Andy?
Well, it's funny because originally it felt like in the past, before we actually started to get, Epiphan and Nexus appliances involved, it felt very piecemealed. So you were trying to manage appliances, you were trying to get them updated, and then you were trying to make sure that they functioned, even if there was like some kind of blip in the power circuit or something happened. I mean, we had a power outage about a week and a half ago, actually, on campus. And in the past, we would have been like, oh, shoot, we have 200 appliances that need like some manual CPR. And now we realize that everything just recovered itself on the Epiphan side when we have the Nexuses in play. So, from that standpoint, I think we really made sure that when we thought about a solution, we wanted to have something where we could just say, look, there's one platform we're going to go to, there's one set of things we need to do. It's done seamlessly with just a couple of clicks versus having to babysit 200 individual appliances. And I think that really opened the door for a lot of other possibilities, and also even opened the door to have other folks utilize not just the lecture recording capabilities, but also the content management system in ways that we've never seen used before. So it really helped to springboard a lot of great ideas from our faculty. I mean, you saw in our case study there where Dr. Biordi Fusaro uses this incredibly frequently, and other faculty are starting to understand that this is not just a luxury anymore. It's a necessity. And it's really helped us rethink how we're going to manage these kinds of endeavors and helps us collaborate with them better. And it's just been such a fun experience and a fun ride.
So I love hearing that, and I love you mentioned the power outage. I know, you told, hey, I got them all up and running. It was great, and things makes me think back to the first time we talked about this, like 2.5 years ago. We're at UCF at well, I guess the last one that was called CCUMC, and we pull up Cloud on the laptop, and we're like, and you just look at it like, wait, I don't have to go to all my classrooms, so it's really fun to see that, hey, that tool set has worked so well for you guys. And I think, one of the, you talked a little bit about CMS integration, a schedule there. Like, take us a little bit deeper into how you use Edge and how that's changed your workflow and really made this deployment process, from what you've told me, pretty straightforward.
Well, honestly, I think that the fun part about the entire Edge platform is that root deployment factor. Because originally, when we were trying to deploy appliances, we'd have to bring one at a time into the office. We'd have to image them up. We'd have to update them like crazy because sometimes they were shipped to us. They were a year and a half old and they were so far behind that we would have to spend hours just making sure the device was ready to go. But with the Nexus devices, literally, we could just take them out of the box, put the ears on, and then we go to one of our students and say, put it in the classroom. Let's swap them out. And all the cabling and infrastructure was already there, so we were really fortunate that everything in that element was already set to go. And literally, the fun part about this process was it took longer to get to the rooms to install and configure the equipment than it did to configure and install the equipment. So we were able to set up templates. We were able to say, okay, this template is going to go to this building. It helped govern what groups they would go into. It helped govern what access people would get to them. And then from that point forward, anytime we needed to do any kind of routine maintenance on the machines, or if we needed to do any kind of updates for them, I just had to go to one place. I didn't have to go back and remember separate IP addresses, separate passwords, go to a separate platform to do all of that, and then wait 2 hours a device for it to hope that it would turn back on after they all updated. With the Edge platform and with all the Nexus devices, literally, I was able to update a fleet of 200 devices firmware in 5 minutes, period. Not 5 minutes per device, 5 minutes total. And I'm just
And
like thinking to myself, what am I going to do with the rest of the time? So we've been able to
well,
utilize this in a way where we could help make our lives better just by having one place to monitor everything, update everything, even check on what's upcoming. And from there, we've gotten our faculty onboarded with how to schedule recordings, how to do ad hoc recordings if they wanted to do those. And it's really opened up the playbook for how lecture capture has been defined on campus.
I love to hear that. And I love to hear you mentioning how, Frank mentioned in the video, like lecture capture and just recording is not a nice to have anymore. It's becoming a must have on campus. And so he said, oh, what am I going to do with all this extra time now? I see the smile on Frank's face, and I hear there's some classrooms to be updated. So I'm sure you guys are still going to be busy. But that does bring us to our first question from the audience. And it's Rosman's asking, do you have any use cases that require capture of more than two signals, like more than just like two content or three cameras? And how do you handle those? Or do you just funnel it back into your default model?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. We do have we have an 8x8 switcher that takes all of our inputs and takes them into the device, and then we can capture that with our content, whether it's the camera in front of the instructor or whether it's a camera that's above the instructor that we use as a image magnification source, just like a document camera. So we could run any extra inputs into the switcher and then the switcher into the Pearl. So the Nexus has two inputs. So we'll send our camera directly into that, and then we'll send our 8x8 feed directly into that. So I guess to answer your question is, yeah, we do have rooms that have more than one source of content to go in. But I don't want to use the word limited, but we do only need two sources to go into the Nexus device from our perspective. We just pick and choose from the touch panel on how many of the 2, 4, 6, or 8 inputs we want to utilize that gets captured.
And I can jump in here too, because Julian, at the very onset of our show here, you were mentioning you used kitchens as one of the kinds of spaces that we have. There's actually a space that does cooking demonstrations, and they had a unique scenario where they had actually two camera feeds. One would be on the chef and one would be on the prep station. And so they also were displaying content. So we were able to figure out how to get one of those camera signals to ingest into the Pearl as a USB source. And we were able to take both of those feeds simultaneously along with the content feed and have it all put together on the content management side. So it looks like a full-fledged production that would also allow those two camera streams to simultaneously run and allow for somebody who was viewing the content to actually actively switch between the two if they wanted a different angle of what they were looking at. So that was one of the things that came to mind when we were talking about the uniqueness of spaces, not just in the classroom setting, but also in those kinds of
Yeah.
applications.
I love that because you're just highlighting the flexibility of the Pearl kind of in the Epiphan platform of, hey, I have this other camera I need to plug in. Cool, I can throw a USB in the back. We do have, I know you guys aren't into SDI on campus for a lot of very good reasons, but folks, we do have an SDI input. We have folks that use that for some PTZ cameras and different things. So the Nexus, like Andy just highlighted, does support 3 channels. So it can do 3 simultaneous independent recordings. We do have, and this is not kind of in the way you guys designed your solution, but we do have other schools that have designed solutions around the Pearl 2 that can do up to 6. So you can do some different things there, and we have the ability to scale up and down based on your capture needs. I think another fun question from, I see from Darren at BC is, you mentioned power outage. How has the first semester with these 200 units gone? Have you had any challenges, updates, anything weird happen to them?
No. Knocking on something here. It's like Andy said, the power outage that we got. I mean, we get power hits every now and then. A building will get something, or they'll do construction, we'll have to take things down. But this was an unforeseen power whack that we took, and it took the whole campus down for a short amount of time. And we had about 30 or 40 calls came in to our help desk, and not one of them was because of that device not working. We had HTTP issues, we lost IP addresses, there were things that we typically are going to happen that we had to get in front of. But once our network switches that are in all of our lecterns are back up and running, the Epiphan box was the first box to come up and running. We had 0 failures.
Well, and the best part about that too was when we were originally testing the Nexus, when it was right out of the box, we gave it the power outage treatment. And, that was our original plan, was to say, let's simulate what could happen with these devices and find out, is it going to come back on its own or is it going to need resuscitation? Which means if it did need resuscitation, we'd have to go cover all 330 plus acres of our campus just to recover all of these devices because they're everywhere. And we had to do that in the past with our previous fleet of non-Pearl Nexus appliances. And that wasn't fun to have to go around and just press a power button to make it come back. And then sometimes they never did come back. When I came back from vacation, because I was on vacation when the power outage happened, I looked at our Edge platform and I just said, why are all the devices still on when I saw all these pings about a power outage? And then I realized, oh, that's right, because they're Epiphan Pearl Nexus devices. They're not quitting for anybody. So overall, first semester with all of these in full force, we have not had one iota of an issue with anything from the management standpoint to the actual maintenance of the appliances to the recording quality to the audio quality. Everything has been just picture perfect and quite dreamy, actually. Even my team's wondering sometimes if we're like missing something because the setup's been fast, the configuration's been fast, and just the management's been seamless. And even with our content management system, everything talks to each other. And it's so easy.
Yeah, that's what we love to hear. That's what we designed for. We Epiphan, we come out of the live event space, and that's something where you've got one chance to do it, kind of like class. You're not going to go redo the same session over again. So if anything external happens, we actually, and you mentioned all the alerts you get from Edge when things disconnect. We had to slow down how fast our network alert sends the email that something goes offline because we had the customer with um, very flaky network that they'd lose connection for under a second, and we'd send them an email saying your Nexus is disconnected, and it was back online before they got into Edge. So it's great to know that that's working well for you. And I think question probably towards Frank's end. We have a few folks asking, and or probably both of you are going to chime in on this, on how those multiple sources and multiple layers work. I mean, both from the selection, is someone managing this in class, or is it just a faculty member? And then from the viewer side, if you got those three camera feeds in the kitchen, how do you watch them? How do you play them back in the CMS?
Yeah, so ultimately the instructor has the hammer. So the touch panel in there has all of our inputs, and they select what they're feeding in. So whether it's the camera that's in front of them, above their head, whether it's a Blu-ray they're playing, or a laptop that's connected, or whatever it is, it's the faculty that does the source changes that are there at the panel that we provide them. And thankfully we have a wonderful programming staff on staff here, and we can make any kind of changes on the fly. So our traditional program that does go to every Rebel Flex room will get modified to all the specialty spaces that we have, like we spoke of earlier, the kitchen. There's a bespoke page that has the layout of the way the instructor wants it, with multiple camera feeds, multiple inputs, and that sort of stuff. So it gives the instructor a little bit more of, I'll call it flexibility, but it's a little bit more of awareness of what they're doing and what they're putting out to be recorded. So the good part is they can't call us and say, I didn't want that recorded, because they were the last ones to hit the source button. So I think that's kind of answers the question.
And I can jump in too and say, usually when it comes to training faculty who are using this for the very first time, or even some who have used it 20 times before, one of the things we always share with them is you're looking on your projection screen or your display or whatever is in the room. What you see is what's getting recorded from the content perspective. So they don't have to think about hitting different buttons if they want something to go to the recording feed versus what's going to the feed in the live space. They just know that when they press that computer source button, whatever PowerPoint or Excel spreadsheet they're showing is what's going to pour it into the recording. And then one of the other phases of the question from the CMS side, the neat part is when those feeds are all ingested, our CMS says, oh, you selected those feeds as the channels that need to be recorded. So those channels are going to record perpetually for the duration of the recording. And then the viewer can actually go into the CMS's viewing playback module and select which stream they would like to see. So for example, if there is a camera feed and a content feed, they can actually toggle between which of the two camera feeds in this kitchen example we discussed earlier. They can toggle between which one of those they want to see perpetually on one of the displays. And then they can also have the content perpetually up so they can see a recipe, or they could see tips and tricks and things like that. But in most of the classrooms, we just have one feed for the camera that points to the instructor, and then the other one is the HDMI content feed that feeds the appliance directly. So most of them will see that side-by-side shot at the same time for the duration of the recording. And then they can make one end of it bigger, make one end of it tinier. They can turn on closed captions if they're enabled. And it really makes the viewing experience a lot more high quality as well, because of course we get really good quality out of the Nexus appliances too.
So I think we've been kind of dancing around it. We keep saying CMS. I think Doug dropped that wonderful P word of the one you guys use, Panopto, in the chat. And Randy had a nice question around, can you talk a little bit more in depth about the CMS platform? You had mentioned you stuck to the same platform, but how did that work, with the transition, and what does that look like from your side?
Very happy to very happy to report that that transition was just as seamless as well. So the nice part about the entire configuration was because Epiphan and Panopto have such a good handshake together, we were able to just take a Nexus device to a classroom. We were able to select Panopto as the CMS that we wanted to use to govern the recordings and the scheduling and the management of it. And then from there, we just had to put in a registration key. And next thing you know, once we get it connected to the network, it says, oh, Panopto's detected another remote recorder appliance. And we were able to assign the name to it, which our nomenclature is building dash room number whenever we put in our appliances into the Panopto database. And After that, we just had to go through and configure who got access to which appliance, which for our general purpose spaces, we have a set list of those. And then for our one-off spaces, we'll add other administrators from other departments so that they have more of an idea of what's happening in their own spaces. And honestly, the access population was what took the longest because some of the appliances had maybe 10 to 15 names of people who needed access to them, just because there was different elements of control from other departments. So just overall, we really weren't doing a ton of extra overhaul to make sure that any of those Epiphan appliances were getting paired with Panopto. We just selected that Panopto was the CMS of choice. And then after entering the registration key, Panopto said, it's here. Just give it a new name, make sure your streams work, and you're good to go. So that transition was also just a piece of cake for us.
And that's always great to hear, and how easy it was to go from appliance one to appliance two. Um, I see Seton Hill was asking, I think it's the folks, someone else replied to it, of how this works with other CMS like a Kaltura, or it's exactly the same experience Andy just described, except replace Panopto with Kaltura there, and you're using their portal to manage them. From our side, we really want to be agnostic for who we support, who we work with. We work with both. The edge side, managing them, setting them up is all going to be identical. You're just selecting your CMS in a drop down, putting in the info from their platform, and hitting go, and then you'll be tied up. So we really we want to make it as simple and seamless as possible, while still being, flexible. For, like Andy said, we can throw another USB in. We have folks that will use the same piece of hardware for Panopto from 9 to 5, and then from 5 to 9, when student groups use that auditorium, they can use it to live stream to YouTube. So there is flexibility from our side as well. I think one more question, kind of in the integration class design side, and Adam's asking, have you guys tested the NDI inputs on the device, or thought about bringing some camera feeds onto the network, or are you still sticking to keeping things wired for now?
Yeah, we're not going across our network at the moment. We keep everything within the space that we're in, whatever the room that's in. We're still a big believer in hardwiring everything within the room's ecosystem. And I don't want to say I don't trust the network, but it's a lot of infrastructure that we're not set up for right now.
I guess before we shift into talking a little bit about buy-in and deployment, I think there's one question I want to ask. I feel like we've been talking a lot about standardizing on spaces, and managing some of the benefits of managing devices, but just on a bigger picture, why did you guys take this route versus doing specialty designs for each kind of space?
Well, I mean, it's a no-brainer to want to support a standardization. So when you have a campus as big as ours, and you have, I mean, multiple campuses at this point with our medical school and our health center on the other side of town, it's a lot easier to support if everything is the same. So it was pretty easy for us to say, well, I'm not going to rewire my lectern for a new piece of hardware. I need to find a new piece of hardware that fits the existing ecosystem I have, so I can pull and put. So that was the way that we designed our rooms, were to be able to keep a standardization across campus, but with limited changes to the infrastructure, so we can make this swap a lot easier.
And also, I think standardization is just so critical from a personnel standpoint. It's really awesome when you can say that your group of folks knows how to support any of the nooks and crannies of any kind of infrastructure like that. They know it like the back of their hand, but the instant that you start to introduce something that's just a little bit different, or even like you're starting to swap brands altogether, then you start to get into a pickle, because then somebody's going to reach out and say, this device isn't working, but they're going to assume that you know what device they're talking about. And you could say, like, is it device type A or device type B? And of course, the person using it's going to say, I don't know. You might even be lucky if they tell you what the device even is. They're just going to say it's not working. So when you have that opportunity to start to get everything in line and start to pilot an infrastructure and then say, okay, I'm going to mass deploy it, then you're really setting your entire team up for success, which means if there's any trouble in the spaces, the call times get expedited. There's less stress on the people who have to support them because they have a good idea of exactly what is going on if they know about like a recurring problem. And just overall morale seems like it improves whenever things are standardized all around. And in an environment where we need teachers to have the resources to teach successfully and where we need to provide a good product for our students, like Frank said, it's a no-brainer, but it's a no-brainer from a bunch of different angles besides just the installation side of the house.
I love that to hear how it's not just day one. It's you have benefits kind of throughout the entire life cycle of your gear and of your rooms to running it this way. And I think that kind of leads nicely something we mentioned. Really want to spend some time with you talking about fielding questions from folks on is, how do you get buy-in to do that? I mean, you came to us last year, Frank, and we're like, I think, we're gonna try to go 100. I kind of want to get it all knocked out in one shot. And a lot of folks love to say that, but then they have a lot of challenges getting their leadership and the finance folks and faculty on campus to buy in. I mean, how did you work through that at UNLV?
Well, the easy part is if you let something fail, that is how you get your administration's attention. So when you have a piece of hardware that is constantly breaking and you're sending them out for repairs and they're taking forever to get back, and you have instructors that have the requirements to be captured and we don't have a device to put in there, and then my phone is ringing, my boss's phone is ringing. When you get with a manufacturer like Epiphan and you work with them to develop the Nexus, and you come back and you tell your boss, say, look, they listen to us. They have a great piece of hardware. Give me some money and I'll fix this problem. And yeah, I mean, you don't always have the money to do it, but ultimately the students are paying for this experience. And if you go to your administration and you tell them that the students' experience is not what they're paying for, that's a lot easier coming from someone like me than it is coming from a mad parent or a mad instructor because they have 30 students getting in their face saying, hey, I'm paying for this. Why isn't this being recorded? It's a lot easier for me to go and ask for money than it is for them to go ask for money. So that's essentially what we did here is I went to my boss and my administration and said, hey, we have a solution. We know how to fix this problem. You're going to have to cut me a big check and we'll knock it out as soon as we possibly can. And for us, it was a month. Like we literally pulled out over 185 devices in a month and had them replaced and had the edge up and running. So yes, it takes some money. It is an investment, but we are a university. So you have to make investments in your infrastructure. And if you don't, you're going to be in trouble.
And knowing your clientele is really helpful too. Like if you're going to go and discuss this with an instructor, they may not have the pool that you would expect if you're trying to get a big endeavor like we did pulled off. But every little bit helps because then it can go up to the dean level. And then from our end, then we now have other people who are also getting the buy-in. And those are the people who are regularly using the tools. So, like Frank said, we have to make sure that we're providing the appropriate solutions to make sure that for certain cases, we need to be in compliance. Like, I can't just go and say, oh, I'm sorry that you're hard of hearing, but I really don't have any way to record your class for you because our devices always fail. That doesn't work, and that might also cause legal problems. But all things considered, we were very lucky that we had an open group of people in our IT area that kind of had this endeavor for us to say, look, if you're going to design this and you're going to work on this, let's hear you out. Let's identify where the problems are, and then let's test the thing and see what happens. And next thing you know, we're putting a purchase order through, we're getting the cash, and there were a bunch of boxes delivered to our offices. And so now that we've been able to have this on a roll for a full semester and even have a good chunk of time to pilot it and put it through the ringers, now they understand like we're just trying to make sure that we're adhering to the university's mission and the university's goals. And that's another big selling point for a lot of folks is if you try to tie it back to the mission of the university and the goals of the university, that will usually keep the ears perked up too. So that's another good little tactic I've learned over time for how to make sure that buy-in actually goes through.
To
I
jump on
love
the back of that, what Andy was saying is, so when we specify AV designs for our classrooms and departmental spaces, so our rooms are funded by us, by IT internally. Departmental spaces are funded by their independent departments and their funding models. Well, if we designed a classroom for them 2 years ago and we stuck capture box A into there, well, that was our design. And if that box is failing, that's our fault. So the way we made it right was all of these department spaces, we actually purchased the Epiphan Nexus to put into those rooms as well. There was no cost to the department for this. So there's the goodwill and the buy-in from their perspective is, hey, I'm coming to you. I'm going to fix the problem you've been having. I'm going to pay for it because it was ultimately our design that caused this problem. Well, now we're giving you a new solution at no cost to you. And that it went a long way with the departments, and that went a long way with our administration as a mea culpa to the departments to say, hey, we are helping the university. We are going to do this for everyone, and IT is owning this. So if you can pull that off like we did, it's just going to make a lot more people happy.
I love that focus that you guys both have on what's the outcome we need to deliver, what's our mission that we're getting tasked to do, and everything just comes back to that. Are we achieving these goals that have been set out for each class? And I think one of the spots, we took credit mentioned a few times, but I see, Adam, in response to the poll said, hey, faculty needs are my number one thing in design. We talked now a bit about how do we get the administration buy-in to deploy technology? Well, what about the faculty end? How do we get them on board with recording and kind of like you said, Andy, you use this in class every day. How do you make sure they're supported with technology?
I think that I echo right along with faculty needs as being a really, really good gauge of what kind of solutions are recommended moving forward in any kind of design. But I think the best part about faculty feedback is when they come out and say, everything looks great. Everything's working awesome. Sometimes no news is good news, but we've also learned that usually that also means that there's something that they haven't reported, and then 2 months go by, and then we were like, well, we could have fixed this in 5 minutes. But at least from the lecture recording standpoint, the most satisfying part about all of this is that we really didn't tell faculty anything about any kind of swap that we were doing. They just expect the same product to come out, regardless of what kind of device you have in play. And we were able to just make sure that faculty who needed their spaces to have recording equipped had the recording capability available for them, whether it was for an accommodation or not. And as we moved forward with that design tactic, we were just making sure that we did our due diligence and putting everything in and getting everything configured. And then that way, when our faculty were ready to start recording in the fall, they just had to go through the same procedure. They could either submit a schedule in advance request, or they could go to the touch panel, press a few buttons, and do a recording on the fly. And either way, they would get a good recording as long as they followed the preparatory instructions, like make sure to wear a microphone and turn on said microphone. But in the end, you know, we've had their backs and made sure that if anything went aloof, we were always Johnny on the spot to make sure that we could help them. But the best news so far is we have had very few cases this semester where anybody's been like, my recording's like not right. That just hasn't happened. So we're grateful that we were able to put all of this together and be so behind the scenes that nobody realizes exactly what's responsible for all of the success from the technical element.
Yeah, our faculty really didn't even know that we did a swap with this hardware. Ultimately, the only way they found out is that their rooms were currently working. If they were having problems with them beforehand, they're not having those problems anymore. Look, let's be honest. All they care about is going in, finding a touch panel, turning the room on, and then the room works. They don't care what box is in there. They don't care what name is on that box that's in there. They don't care about the hardware. They want to go in, turn it on, it works, go home and review it. That's it. the best buy-in for me is other instructors talking to other instructors. The faculty are the best buy-in. If they're happy, then they're going to tell their peers that they're happy. If they're unhappy, they're definitely going to tell me that they're unhappy. So there's a difference there. So for us, the buy-in's easy. We just let success breed success. We do have a faculty center here on campus. I think they're rebranding it now to the Teaching and Learning Commons. But that is where we rolled out our pilot for Rebel Flex rooms 4 years ago. And that has still become a place of gathering for instructors and for Andy to give instructions and stuff like that. So your best thing is to you can get the content of what you're trying to do in front of the instructors, but they don't really need to know about the hardware. The hardware is really nothing for them to be concerned about.
I love that. I mean, you just, again, coming back to experiences, we just want the rooms to work. If they work, we don't hear much. They talk to each other, they celebrate it, things go well. And I think those outcomes get there. I'm going to encourage everybody in the audience, keep asking your questions. We've got a few more minutes here. I want to make sure it's anything, in your head. Let's get it out there. You've got Frank and Andy for a little while longer. And I mean, you can always reach us via email, but it's way more fun when we're live. The one thing I did want to ask, it came up a bit earlier. I gotta find who exactly asked it. But really around, you mentioned your Rebel Flex rooms. I know you guys made a big investment there and updated some of those rooms to support conferencing. How does that, Teams, Zoom, live video conference for the room interact with the capture? Are they separate? They start together? I mean, how does that work?
So I can speak a little bit to that. So we are a Zoom house, and one of the things that we had always encouraged faculty to do, especially in the days pre-Pearl Nexus, was we would say, sure, you can set up a recording in Panopto, but if you're going to be doing a synchronous course with multiple audiences, you may want to also do a recording in Zoom as well, just to have as a backup. So technically, both of those services perform separately. We didn't have any kind of interaction from the classroom standpoint for Zoom to say, all right, I'm going to record a Zoom feed into Panopto. It just didn't have that functionality. And looking back on the design, that's a good move because if one goes aloof, you have a backup and you could still use it. But one of the other things that we learned throughout that process was, we started to design those RebelFlex spaces for those situations, especially during the pandemic, where people needed to be able to accommodate those folks who are off campus. And then we learned over time that those needs are still there, but they're there for different reasons now. So when it comes to the capture element of it, we're still encouraging folks to use Pearl Nexus and Panopto as the primary form of capture because that's what yields the highest quality as far as what we're getting for the best bang for our buck. But that Zoom element, while it's still a backup, is also still a really good alternative because we also have faculty who configure a Zoom Panopto integration, which will take their Zoom recordings, port them into Panopto, and then they have some other way to utilize that content if they needed to use it for some other reason. But they also have the full ability to say, I don't want to share this, or I'd rather share this version instead of this other version. And it has really made the capture very flexible. But I don't know how many faculty are relying on the backup version in Zoom now, especially if they're just teaching a traditional face-to-face course, because they know the reliability of Pearl Nexus and Panopto has been a very, very welcome sight for an otherwise chaotic time when people are having trouble logging in, trouble with multi-factor authentication. They just want something that just is stable, steady, and functional. And that's what we've really developed here.
I think, well, you touched on the pandemic experience part of Doug's question, how you rolled this out, but I guess how has, just from the capture side, was that something that started before or after the pandemic, and how has pure, centrally managed, Andy Frank capture versus instructors doing Zoom? How's that changed in the last 2 years that we've kind of been in some sense of normal?
Well, I can share that one of the reasons why I'm graciously employed at UNLV is because there was a point where the campus was looking to get lecture capture and video conferencing all together. And so I remember seeing the posting and saying, this might be a really good opportunity here. So we've had, lecture capture on campus since 2018. And believe it or not, it all started with our clinical simulation center doing a nice pilot round for us. And we were helping them configure the appliances at the time. We were working with the CMS and seeing how scheduling worked and access and everything like that. But over time, at the time there were just 12 spaces and now we've got over 200. So based on, the management side of the house, I now have a team of 3 other people who help me with the content management piece of it. And I mean, we get everything from how do people access this content, or my content's stored in this other folder. I don't want it to be there. How do I move it to this other space? Um, it's really been more about how do we educate the faculty on the amount of control that they have for what happens with that content and what to do with that content if they're going to be moving forward and using it in other courses or for other purposes, because there's FERPA considerations, there's captioning considerations for accessibility and compliance that have to be considered as well. So really the content management has been focused a little bit less on how to schedule recordings and how to make recordings happen. It's been more focused on what can I do with this gem of a product after I'm done with it? Or what can I do with it to make sure that a wider audience can get exposure to it? And what do I need to consider? So those are more of the logistical sides of the house when it comes to content management. But literally, we have so many users now recording stuff, whether it's in the classroom or from their office, that we're getting so many more requests for what can we do now? What can we do for the future? And that's the rewarding part of it, is seeing it get used in many facets beyond the classroom, but we can still pat our backs for the classroom metamorphosis.
I think the last question I see here, unless people have got other stuff coming in, please keep them coming. We got a couple minutes if you do. For Frank, I mean, you mentioned a little bit, developing the product with Epiphan and testing some other stuff. Did you do a POC with the Nexus, and what did you guys do with that POC to make sure it works in your environment?
Yeah, actually, Andy did. It's sitting right behind his shoulder, right there. That's basically was our Epiphan test bench. Every piece of hardware that you guys sold, I kept calling you and getting a new one for 90 days at a clip, and it would sit back in Andy's office, and we would run it through its paces. And then once we realized that this was kind of the way we were going, we started to buy a few of the minis and a few of the other pearls, and starting to deploy them in certain locations as basically like quiet proof of concepts. We didn't like tell many people. Essentially, we just wanted to see if that would work in the ecosystem without causing grief. And we slowly realized that we have our solution right in front of us. We just need the money now to deploy it. And that's when I went to my administration and said, look, we just solved the problem. We need money now to complete it. So yeah, our proof of concept was internally in Andy's office, and then a handful of classrooms that we cherry picked around the campus. And there was even a few that we told the clients beforehand. We're like, hey, we're trying out a new piece of hardware for you. It's working on campus. It's working in our test bench, but we're going to deploy it for you. And if we fall on it, our face, we'll swap it out with something else at no cost to you, because again, back to it was our design. And ultimately what we did is we pulled out the Epiphan box we put in, and we put the Nexus in its place.
And and just to kind of jump in on that too, my proof of concept directives were do what you can with it. Like put it through any of the paces that you can think of. That's why I was like, knocking out power to it every once in a while and then watching it come back. And I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't have to actually do anything for it to recover itself. Like, what? So that was really incredible. And then we also actually, that device behind me was the template setter for any of the other devices that we were going to be putting into the fleet. So I had my gut was telling me like we're going to be deploying these in mass. So I started creating the templates on it and then deploying those templates to the new devices. So like literally when our students got done installing them, they maybe waited 2 to 3 minutes for me to say, oh, it's configured and it's paired. And I remember the first time we did that, one of the students was like, are you sure? I said, it's in Panopto. I clicked a few buttons. It's there. Move on to the next room. And that's why our pace of install was lightning quick.
That is great to hear, and it was fun working with you throughout the process too, getting your edge set up. Every check-in was like, nope, things are going great. Like you said, like, oh man, I tried this power cycling thing and it works. And so it was really, throughout the process, we enjoyed working with you all as well because, like you said, you put it through its paces. You came up with some real life scenarios that we hadn't thought of either. But it was great to hear that it worked with flying colors in each one. At this point, I'm going to give the floor to Frank, Andy, if you guys have any final thoughts or anything you wanted to share before we go.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the reason why we're here is because of Epiphan, a partner, right? We had a problem. We went to them, worked with them, came up with a solution together, and it's been nothing but a home run for us. If you guys are listening, I'm going to guess the majority of you are from higher ed, and you're interested in this, work with Julian, call Ron, get involved with this. They'll send you a box, test it out, put it through its paces like we did. I don't think you're going to be upset.
I have to say as well, like just the enriching part of this entire process has been the fact that not only have we noticed all of these successful results, but we have been able to take it to a level where we've also gotten our student helpers enriched in it. We've been able to effectively have students going around installing these appliances. We've also had students helping us pair the appliances. And when you have a system that can run like that, and you have that gratification of not only are we getting stuff done, but we're also giving students that experience in the field of being responsible for making sure the inputs are tightened correctly and making sure that the configurations are set properly. And then you see the result and their expressions of knowing that they did a great job. I think it was just a huge win beyond just saying that we have this tool on campus now. Everybody got to essentially contribute and make it a successful project. And to echo what Frank said, everything that we've paired with Epiphan, not just the appliances, but with technical questions, wish list items, even things to, tinker with in Epiphan Cloud and Epiphan Edge, you know, always great to have that resource and always great to have the open ears and to at least hear out what the thought processes are. And we are grateful for that as well, because that is what defines a successful project is the collaboration, the effort from vendor to the university and its constituents. It's just all a full circle reward. And so that's my message for everybody who's with us is, Epiphan's been an amazing partner.
And you guys have been an amazing partner from our side too to work with. Always enjoy seeing you guys. I have nothing else to add beyond that. So thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks Frank and Andy for sharing your time, your story with us. And hopefully we'll see everybody soon in person at different events. And thank you all for joining. We'll see you later.